Salt. What is salt? What do we write down? Anybody have anything? What is it?
Is it a mineral?
Shh.
I mean, like,
Sure.
scientifically, I don't know.
Sure. Anybody else? What else? What is it?
It's a seasoning and a preservative.
Ooh, it is the seasoning. When you read a recipe and it says season your food, it means put salt in it, like season to taste. One of the things that I've learned as I've gone to cook a little bit more, she had a different. I was wavering back and forth of which video of hers I wanted to do. That's her name just totally left my brain. She was on cooking YouTube channel. Anyway, she's a fantastic cook. And someone said, do you really put as much salt in there as whatever? And it's her walking around her pantry pulling out Diamond Kosher, like 5-pound boxes out of every corner. She's like, again. Is that your food doesn't taste as good as a restaurant because you don't use butter and salt like you should in cooking. That's what I've learned in cooking. If you think, man, why does that food at the restaurant taste so much better? It's because they use real butter. And they use way more salt than you would be comfortable watching them put in your food. I have a little grabby bamboo thing that I can pick salt up out of, and I use Diamond Crystal Kosher salt. You can buy it on Amazon. It's the best salt on the planet. Seriously. And it's not as salty as table salt, like the square, like you get, you think of salt like a table salt. It's not as salty as that, so you can be a little bit more aggressive with it. And Ashley one time was like, this makes me uncomfortable. So anyway, salt, what else does it do? I heard preservative. It is the seasoning. It is the seasoning. What else does salt do? Ooh, yeah, it highlights, it emphasizes, right? Like salt on a tomato is the best. Salt on a watermelon, I used to think my grandma was losing her marbles, but she was right. It brings out that sweetness. It's like a good counter. What else does it do? It highlights, it preserves, it seasons. Yeah, it replenishes electrolytes. It's a good thing you need it to make electrical charges between brain cells work. I think that's what it does. I'm not entirely sure actually, but it sounds right. It also clogs your arteries or something, I think, at some point too. We're going to read Matthew 5. 13 through 16. So we're going to continue as we go down Matthew here. So last week we did the Beatitudes, right? This kind of picture of Jesus, not necessarily a go do these things, that's what gets you in heaven, but you were reached when you were these things. This picture of this thing. So we're going to continue on. Matthew 13 through 16. Mine says, Jesus teaches about salt and light. Sounds like we're in the right place. Mine is page 1593. So here we go. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? If it is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This is one of these instances where the Northern English translation doesn't capture what this verse is saying. I once talked about, there's a Bible, and it's called the Y'all Bible. Everyone say y'all? Y'all. We don't use that terminology around here. We say you, even if it's a group of people. But see, y'all is very, very useful because it makes a distinction between a single and a grouping. Does this make sense? Y'all is great. I wish it was more in our language. So the Greek here, when you look at 13, it starts with you are the salt of the earth. Everyone say you. Now say this word instead. Say y'all. Great. That is the actual, it's a plural word in that moment. It's speaking to a collective group. So this is directed to a community, not to an individual. We have this sense in American Christianity in particular that the Christianity is very individualized. It's very individualistic. But a good chunk of the Bible, and there's a Bible out there that's called the Y'all Bible, and it takes all the plural yous and it replaces them with y'alls. So you can see how many times it's spoken to a group, a collective, instead of an individual. And so here, this is this This is this community aspect of it. This is Jesus talking about how the self-life, the self, the single, is of the least importance, right? The life of others is of supreme importance. This becomes, when you see how this y'all is used through all of his teachings, you get this sense he's talking to the health of a collective, this collective group, instead of one individual person. So you are the salt of the earth is you all, y'all, everyone I'm speaking, you all are the salt of the earth. Not just you as an individual, but you as a community of believers. You with me? Great. So it seems so concise and so clear, it can be overlooked all the time. But this is directed to a grouping. So Jesus is declaring to those around him, to those that are blessed, if you remember this ragtag group of like lepers and outcasts and whatever, that the blessing, right, that you've been given a commission to be partnered with Christ and declare who he is and word and deed, that y'all, not just the individual, but y'all are the salt and the light. Everyone say y'all salt. Good. You'll never ever come across a you anywhere else and be like, I wonder if this is you or y'all. So it's most of the time it's y'all. So two big things that oppose what Christ has come to accomplish on earth. Okay, so here's our two big things that are in opposition, right? The danger of assimilation. Say assimilation. Good. That's looking more like the world. You with me? That's looking more and more like the world and less like the kingdom. So world versus kingdom here. It's looking more like the world and less like this salt and light. This is the image he's going to give us for this kingdom image, is salt and light here. The danger of actually viewing Christianity through the lens of ourselves, right? So if you see it as just about you and not this community, and you start to look more like the world, you start to see it through the lens of your own experience instead of through the lens that Christ has given us here. So the second one, the danger of having little to no impact in the world. So say no impact. So we've got danger of assimilation and no impact. Good. So we're called to be salt and light. And so because if we have this likeness to the culture that we've been called to, you can't be salt anymore. Let's put all the salt together. Have you ever tasted food without salt? I grew up tasting food without salt. My mom's not here today, I can say that. And so salt it's very distinct. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're eating ice cream and there's like 5 grains of salt in it, it's gonna pop out. Are you with me? Like, it is super distinct. You know right away, like salt water versus good water. Take 5 little grains of salt and dissolve them in a cup of water and drink it. You're gonna instantly taste it. It's very distinct. So if we look less and less like this kingdom, and we look more and more like the culture, we're no longer distinct. And salt has this distinctness, but it brings out these other things that we talked about. Protects against decay, it flavors what it touches, and it can't do those things if it's just like what it seasoned. Like, salt in salt doesn't do anything. Just like adding more watermelon to watermelon is whatever. So if we're not distinct like salt, we're good there. Light is not something that we hide, but it's something that's meant to illuminate everything and everyone it comes into contact with. And that's where Jesus gets this statement, okay? So you don't hide under a lamp. This isn't what you're trying to be. Everyone say, this is not what I'm trying to be. This is what you are. Okay? So y'all are blessed, right? We went through this last week. He's talking to this crowd. You're a bunch of whatevers. You were called to the kingdom first. You're blessed. You're all these things. And then it says, you are the salt. Are you with me? You are the salt. You don't become salt. You don't get it after I've whatever. You are this thing. You are not trying to become it. If you are blessed, if these blessings meet you in some way, then you are the salt of the earth. You are the light. So as a community, y'all, we need to understand this is a communal address to a body of people. You all have been blessed. You all are salt. As a collective unit, you will accomplish the things that salt does and what light does. Good. Continuing on. Jesus calls us to live in the freedom of the world and sends us out into it. Because in Jesus we see that God's not involved with suffering, but in Jesus he becomes identified with suffering. So we're continuing through the whole gospel, that God doesn't just feel sorry for us, but he's actually willing to get involved, get his hands dirty, and he's calling us to be involved in that as well, as he breaks down this salt metaphor for us. So that we as a church are to witness God's deep abiding concern for involvement in humanity through word and deed. That's how we're salt and light. So we're going to break that whole thing down, what he says in here. So let's get down to it. Here we go. Yep. All right. So there's so much there's so much discouragement in Christian life that we're constantly attempting to be something that we can only be in Christ. So it's not that we're working towards victory. So It all wraps up perfectly, I promise. We're going to get there. It's that we're working from a victory. So we got to understand that. So once again, you've been blessed. Y'all are blessed. Just, come on, like we're alive. Y'all all are salt. And so because we work from that position, we're not working to achieve, but we're working from a victory. Does this make sense? Like we're not like, someday we'll be salt, like someday we'll get there, but we're working from this position of victory. And so the Christian church a lot of times attempts to be something it can only be, but without Christ at the head of it. So it all begins with this working from a victory, that we are, it begins with this grace that Jesus declared to us before anything else. You are blessed, you are salt, we're going to work from this position. Does this make sense? Great. The beauty is that God has made us new people with a new identity and a new purpose, and that calls us to figure out how that identity works out in this world. So here's how it goes. Christ is the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and that by our identification with him, we are that when the Holy Spirit dwells within us, when we have these blessings. So before Jesus dives into the ethics of the rest of this sermon, which the Sermon on the Mount's full of them, we know the turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, all these platitudes that we know, he has this moment where he talks about where you're working from before we achieve these things. How should we live? And he first says that you need to become what I am what I've done on behalf of yourself. It's not that become what you should be, but just express who you already are. You're working from a position of victory. Good? Great. The warning that follows is a reminder that the real danger in our ability is to not become exactly what we are. So the gospel is one of freedom, that we've been set free, we can make decisions, and we're now responsible to be what we were declared to be in himself. So this is this problem. God did everything on our behalf through Jesus so that we put our trust in him and we become free to participate in this witness, this reality, to do what Jesus has done, and by doing that preservation against decay, by bringing flavor to life, because we bring that meaning and this illumination of truth, and we're revealers of the darkness, we are drawn into the beauty of who Jesus is. But it's paradoxical because we want to become that, but we don't know how to work ourselves out of it. If he did that anyway. Salt is influence and light is visibility. We're going to break this all down. The church is meant to have direct and concise impact on society in which it was placed. Did you know that? Say that with me here. The church is meant to have a direct impact on society in which it's placed. This is what being salty is about. Right, if you just become watermelon, if you're assimilating, you're not impacting, right? If we just like became, I can't even think of anything right now. Like, all I can think of is the comedian who's like, those like old guy societies where they wear like funny hats and they sit down at a table and they're like, will we buy a new round table? We vote on Thursday. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, if we just become that, we can't season life. We can't preserve. We can't do any of those things if we just look more and more like every other organization that gets around. And so, as a reflection of this, I'm troubled by the loss of flavor at times I have in my own life. So, or of hiding light, of losing my seasoning. And so this is indeed a communal address. All of us will have times of failure when we come short, where we're not salty in the good way and our light is hidden, where we have to hold each other accountable to encourage to live out of that victory. Your salt and your light, let's live like we have that. I've told this story before, but I game online, and one time I was gaming forever. We were doing something forever, and I told these guys like 6 hours into this raid, I was like, we got to beat it on this next go because I have to preach tomorrow morning. Have I told you this story? No, I was playing like 6 hours, like, I got to preach tomorrow morning. I had no idea who these guys were, and they all got really quiet. It's like 3 a.m, and this was several years ago, and the guys go, "You're a pastor?" See, that's not awesome, right? Because there's something about the conversation, we would have never guessed that. Well, why not? Was it the way I was speaking? Was it the words I was using? Was it the way I was choosing to do whatever? It's problematic because we've lost that salt and light. We should exude seasoning, flavor, light, all these things in everything that we do. That's problematic. We've mixed up Christianity with what it's actually about. Matthew 10:27. We're going to jump ahead because we'll tie this whole thing together for us. Matthew 10:27. Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. What's whispered in your ear, proclaim from the rooftops. Whatever I tell you in private, you should shout from the mountaintop. This is this salt and lightness. So here's the question that I want to ask and ponder for a few seconds. If we want to volunteer answers, I'd love to hear them too, but we don't have to. How do churches die? Sure? AJ, you've been in church a long time. How do churches die?
Lose their saltiness.
Sure, that's a good way to go. Way to go, Sunday school answer on that one, big guy. What does that look like? Complacency? Look at that, Merrick guy. Look at it, AJ.
They stop doing actual ministry.
Sure, it becomes contained protection. Okay, what else? How about this? How do people fall away from church?
Maybe assimilation.
Okay, sure.
Like you start to look so much like
Yeah.
society than what you need.
Yeah, you're a country club, right? You're just like, I could do this somewhere else that has better TV, you know? I could go to some place, I could tithe to the golf club, and then I get to do 18 every once in a while, you know? Good, assimilation. How do people fall away from church? Like, they've been going forever, and then all of a sudden they're gone. And they're just like, I don't know. We don't have to volunteer them away. Here's kind of what Jesus is getting at with this salt and light. They lose sight of who they are in Christ, and that happens because they lose sight of Christ. So he says, y'all are blessed. Say, y'all blessed. Y'all are salt, and y'all are light. They lose sight of those things. They lose sight of it. It loses the meaning. It loses everything that goes along with it, and they start to slip away. The same thing happens in a church. You forget you're blessed, you forget your salt, you forget your light, you assimilate, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you're a country club without a golf course, and people are like, I could do this somewhere else, because there's no more meaning to it. Does this make sense? They fall into the trappings of trying to keep up with the world, or they try to protect themselves from the world, right? They shut the doors to society, and Jesus says, I want to keep them in the world, but protected, right? So keep the doors open. The trappings of keeping up with the world. I remember I was working at a church somewhere, I can't remember where it was, and they were doing an upgrade to the sanctuary, and they wanted to put in some new projectors and stuff. And the guy who was selling them said, these are as good as what you put in a movie theater. These are going to just look so good. And he said, people need to see something here that's as good or better from what they could get in their own house, or else what's the point of coming in? Isn't that a really poignant little sentence? Like, if the TVs are good, the people will stay. That's a country club. You with me? It's assimilation. If we can just look as good as the Bones Theater, people will be in here. You with me? They fall into those trappings. So here's the question. Are we a salty, shiny community? What does salt do? We said it preserves. Someone over here had one, I thought. Seasons, right? It's the seasoning. So do we bring preservation against decay? As a Christian church across America, are we preserving against the decay in our local communities? Are we people that shine brightly the truth of Jesus? And is that light seen in the way that we give our lives for the good of one another in the place that we're called to? Jesus says, look, this is what you are. You are supposed to preserve against decay. You're supposed to bring meaning to life. You're supposed to flavor the world. You're supposed to be a beacon of light people can see to. Is that what we are? Is that what we're being? Ouch. This one hurts every once in a while whenever I read this. And he's saying it begins right here. Like, are you being that to one another? Are you all salt? Are you doing it? Does Columbia City know or care about the churches in the city? Does the average person, can they even name 5? Do they care? If First Church vanished like an alien spaceship, just and it was gone, would the average person who's not attending church know or care that it disappeared? Or here, or the Catholic Church, or any of them? I said this, this is a phrase I've said before. This got me in a lot of trouble at a church I was at before. I had a long conversation with a person afterwards, and I don't think they still like that I said it. In moving here, I remember telling Ashley, this is kind of the thought when we wanted to move over to here to do this, because I said this at the church and it was such a whatever, and I was like, man, I really wish this was true. I have never cared and will never care if this room is full. It would be great. I would love it. Like, it would be exuberant. I would be so ecstatic, but for the reasons that I know that people are here. Does this make sense? I don't care if it's completely full if we're not actually doing salt and light. Does that make sense? I don't care. I remember a friend of mine did youth group, Ryan Gurnan, great guy, amazing, just pastor, spiritual, whatever, and he was working at a church or at camp or something one year, and they said, we just need to have the auditorium full. And he said, I could make it full. Wouldn't mean anything, but I could fill the auditorium. I could do it. I just throw a Reliant K concert or whatever. I'd fill every seat. I don't care if the room's full if it's not actually salty and lighty. In the same sense, I don't care if the room is almost completely empty if the 3 people in the room understand it. So what does it mean to look like salt, to be like salt? If y'all are salt, what does that actually mean? Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's not good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. It's interesting. You not only become useless, but you're thrown out. You're only good to be discarded and stomped on the ground. I think useless would have hurt enough, right? Like, if salt loses its saltiness, you're no longer useful. I'm like, oh, that kind of hurts, but I'm going to throw you out the window and have horses trample over you. I'm like, that feels a little aggressive, like that kind of hurts. So, what does salt do? For 6,000 years, we've talked about it. It's one of the most important discoveries of mineral. We'll say it's a mineral, why not? It's one of the most important, amazing discoveries of all time, salt. It's probably changed humanity forever. It preserves. You can throw it on meat and it can dry in the sun. It cures things. It keeps food stored longer. It's a preservative. Are you worth your weight in salt? This is the old sailor saying when you're like, are you worth the weight in salt? Are you worth keeping on the ship? Can you pull the weight of salt that we have to use to get enough food on the ship for you to do the work? So it preserves. It flavors. Use more salt. Use better salt. You're cooking, everybody will thank you. Jesus says about the earth, when Jesus says of them on earth as a preservation against decay, there's something distinct about us, this goodness that protects against the decay that comes through living against the rule of the kingdom. So we've been talking about Jesus' kingdom coming, this upside down where the first are last, last are first, the blessed are the outcasts. And there's something about the way that we live that we are preserved against a decay, something that is pushing against those kingdom values. If we really are living it out, we are able to stand against those things. Does this make sense? We're being if we can do it, we can hold each other accountable. This is what it means to be salty as y'all in a community. It means when I see AJ being a bad father, I'm just making this up, AJ, sorry buddy. He's a great father. Everyone say, AJ, you're a great father. I'm sorry that you're the target of me this morning. But if I see AJ doing something that I know is harmful, right, as my saltiness, I'm preserving against the decay not only amongst this community, that I look to AJ and I go, hey, we're not doing this anymore. This is not okay. Does this make sense? We're preserving ourselves. We're holding each other accountable. In the same way, we're doing the same thing to the world outside. We're seeing that decay. We're seeing those that are in need of social justice being left aside, and we're saying, hey, whoa, this is not, we're not going to let the world beat you down. We're going to bring you, does this make sense? Okay. These people living against the rule of kingdom, the rule of God, right? These things, we're calling the world into saying, bringing the last to being first, those at the bottom to being within the fold. We talked about last week, there's no margins in Christianity, right? If there is no margin, everyone is welcome, everyone is involved, everyone can be brought in. And when we see those margins put up, that's a worldly thing. That's not the kingdom, okay? We preserve against those things. God came into Christ, into the world to set humanity that was decaying itself, that was centered in destruction and dismantling all these rules. It was being undone. Jesus was sent in to redo, to recreate, and to begin to preserve. We don't see the full effect of that just yet. And the church is here to remind the world of Christ's victory over those things. So in other words, we're preserving a factor of the goodness of Christ. We're supposed to see that goodness in Christ and be little kingdom outposts. We've talked about this. That people can see and see what that kingdom value looks like. That whenever God's people gathered, we're this kingdom outpost, right? This glimpse of a part of what would come in full in Christ. We should look distinct from the world. We should preserve against that decay amongst ourselves and begin to push it outward to bring other people within. So do we do that, right? Is this just broad sense, not just here, but think about it. Is this a place where darkness doesn't have control? that the margins are brought to the center, that those who need are given full? Is there a preserving factor that's keeping corruption from taking control? Salt also seasons. Life before Christ is marked by dullness. It's a lack of flavor. It lacks meaning. We look for an escape from our conscience that says that we're guilty, we deserve it, right? The world is brilliant at creating diversions to escape that feeling, right? If you're sitting and you're like, I just feel like I should be doing better. They're like, but have you tried pinball? Have you tried video games? Have you tried alcohol? Have you tried drugs? Have you tried cheating on your wife? Have you tried making $1 million? Have you tried stealing from the guy next to you? Have you tried lying? Have you tried doing these things? Anything to pass the blame off to yourself. As long as there's somebody else in the out group I can point to, I can feel better about myself. Does this make sense? Jesus so radically changed our lives by bringing new meaning to living, to this total life, that there is new flavor to existence. We should have new flavor. We should be like, you know what's not great? Scamming people. That used to make me feel good, but now it's this life in Christ, this upside down kingdom virtue. This is where we get this seasoned flavor from. Jesus didn't save us from separation so we could go back to being a flavorless life. And once you experience the flavor of life, you shouldn't go back. Like once you've eaten buttery, salty food, guys, you're never going to go back. This is what he's saying here. The church is the salt of the earth, right? It's meant to bring witness to the world about this total meaning and total life. That there is no part of existence that Jesus does not get his hands into. That he can bring a robust meaning to every single aspect of existence. And if there's no more excitement, there's no more wonder, there's no more amazement, who were dead and are now alive, you should ask yourself this: are you really in Christ? If you don't have a wonder and excitement, I talked about one time we like to demystify the scriptures. We like to say like, well, actually when Moses parted the sea, there was a chance that the Red Sea at that time was only a couple feet deep. So actually it could have just been a tidal, whatever. It's like, who cares? We're demystifying. Does this make sense? If we can't live in this wonder and amazement that we were once dead and doomed, and now we live in a different kingdom with the ruler to give us purpose and meaning in our life, have we really encountered Christ? We were never meant to save us for personal or private reasons. The evidence of being saved by Jesus is that you no longer care about what's best for you, but you care about what's best for the kingdom and his world. So do we as a church bring that kind of flavor to our town and seasoning? You're to be a witness to a whole new reality, to become a force of good that preserves the world against the darkness of having full control, and you're reminding the world that Jesus overcame that darkness. You flavor the world so that you now bring a total meaning to life, and through that obedience to the kingdom, who Jesus is as both king in word and deed, what you do and what you say. And if we don't do that, we lose our saltiness and we're trampled. So here's a question I had never thought of until doing a study for this. How does salt lose saltiness? It's stable. It doesn't spoil. I don't know if it doesn't spoil. You can have salt for ages. So I kind of did some stuff, and I only lose the saltiness in two ways. One, when it's compromised by water. So it affects the chemical in such a way that they can lose saltiness. You can dilute it enough, and it can eventually break down anyway, lots of science and whatever. So the church loses its saltiness when it's compromised by culture, right? It's flavored by the culture instead of flavoring the culture. Does this make sense? So when it loses its saltiness, it's no longer effective in any way, right? It's flavored like the world. You put 1 grain of salt on 700 million pounds of watermelon. It's not going to work anymore. You dissolved a single grain of salt in the ocean. Well, the ocean's already salty in Lake Michigan, and then you scoop some of that water out, and you're like, I'm going to go season my soup. It's not going to work. And the other one is this. This is kind of like meta. This is kind of like meta a little bit. When it's not used to preserve or flavor, it's useless. So if you got a box of salt sitting up on your shelf, it's no good. It's not doing anything. It's just sitting there. Does this make sense? This is the only thing. Science papers. I was in journal articles. This is all anyone had. Salt either breaks down compound when you dissolve it in water and spread it so much it no longer has any effect, or you're just simply not using it. It's just sitting in a box and it does absolutely nothing. If the church does not do the preserving and flavoring, then bad news. you're not really a church. The church is useless if it doesn't understand that it's not there to be for itself, but for the kingdom, for the rest of the world. So is the church compromised? Are we cloistered, right? If you're not those things, right? If you're not flavoring, if you're not preserving, salt becomes useless and it's trampled, forgotten and unimportant. It's so unimportant, you just throw it out and let the animals trump over it. That's how unimportant. You couldn't even do anything else with it. Right? If you had like a bad copper pipe in your thing, you could cut it out. You could smelt the copper down. You could make something with it. It still has use, even if it's degraded to be whatever. But the salt, it's so useless, it's just tossed out the window and trampled by animals. Forgotten and unimportant. Oh, you go to church? I didn't have any idea. Oh, you're a Christian? I never would have guessed that. To end quickly, because it's light. Light is an outward thing. The church is outward. It doesn't exist for itself or for the individual, right? Outward expression is done in witness. So on a hill, to be elevated to a high point, this beacon out of hiding for everyone to see. It illuminates for everyone the reality of what they need and who they are to be. You come out of darkness and into life, into the light. Church's responsibility is to be revealers of Christ's light. And that should be a challenging responsibility. So how do you know if as a church, as a Christian, if you're doing that, if you're being a light that is shining on the darkness to call people out of it? How do you know if you're really doing that effectively? And I want to say this, and I want you to repeat it, and then we're gonna think about it for just 1 second here. We'll repeat after me. No more neutral responses. No more neutral responses. That's how do you know if you're doing light, you're revealing darkness, you're calling people out of it into light? There will be no more neutral responses. When you live in the light and bring others into light, some people are going to embrace it. If you illuminate, if I look at AJ and I illuminate something that I don't like happening inside of him, I call him and I say, hey, that's not going to work, bud. Some people will embrace it. They will embrace what the light has revealed. They'll recognize a deep need to change. Others will be horrified by what you say. They'll be horrified by what has been revealed inside of them, and they will turn against you. The church is too comfortable with no reaction. We're too comfortable with a neutral response. If we do what is right, if we call people to kingdom values, there will be no neutral response. They will either love it or they will hate it. There is no neutrality to the kingdom. This is who you are because of what I've done for you on your behalf. You are the salt, you are the light. How shall we then live as salty, lighted people? May we be comfortable with no more neutral responses. May we call people out of darkness, whether it comes at a harm of our... You know what? Let's go back. This whole neutral response thing, and then I'm going to pray. I just want to remind you where this comes out of. No more neutral responses. 5:11. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for great is the reward in heaven, for the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. There will be no net neutrality to calling out to the kingdom. People will scurry by what the darkness is revealed in the light, or they'll embrace it for the kingdom. May we be comfortable to bring flavor and preservation to this world for the kingdom, and may we be okay with calling it out, whether or not the response is in the good or bad, but may we live as kingdom people here forward.